Can me feel it, you? You get me, got you. You get me, can me feel it, you? You get me.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for engaging conversations about the topics that matter most in our culture. If you love nuance, if you want to better understand different points of view, if you're tired of the screamers taking all the oxygen out of the room, if you'll enjoy edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me, you love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. So glad to be a part of this growing ecosystem of principled voices, engaging in conversations that matter, trying to make a difference, and we don't mind having some fun either. I am your host, glad to be joined by our co-host and my dear old dad, Ronnie Nathan. Pops, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Nice to see you.
I'm doing well. I have to speak well because my granddaughter's on this show.
Is it doing good or doing? I think either. I've heard debates about which one is the proper usage, adverb versus adjective, linking verb, that kind of thing. But that's not what we came to talk about. What we came to talk. Our guest today is very special to me, and I'm assuming to my co-host, right? She's kind of special to you, right, Pops?
She's very special.
All right. Ayla Shea Nathan happens to be my niece and Ronnie's granddaughter. But she's also a student and an engaged citizen in the family tradition who has personally experienced anti-Semitism, our subject today. Whether it's historic atrocities, more recent history, such as men carrying torches shouting Jews will not replace us, or current tensions that have resulted from the conflicts between Hamas and Israel, hostility and even hatred for Jews is all too familiar to our people. Or as my grandmother and our Uncle Sal would say about our family's experience in Eastern Europe, the one thing the Tsarists and the Bolsheviks and the Cossacks and everybody could all agree upon is everybody hated the Jews. And on that happy note, Ayla, it is always great to see you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm great.
Good. I figured we'd start with a little bit of context, personalize this, but also give some historical context as well. What does it mean to you to be a Jew?
Well, something that, and I didn't really know this until I kind of got to college and started learning more about it. But so it's like important to know that Judaism is, as much as it is unified by a common religion, it's like a distinct culture and ethnicity. So you can be ethnically Jewish, religiously Jewish, or both. I mean, as you know, like you converted to Christianity, you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, but you can't shake the Jewish part off. You take a DNA test and right. You're like 99% Ashkenazi.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, like you can be atheist or agnostic. And so it's everybody's relationship with being Jewish is different. And I think that's what's so cool about Judaism.
Yeah. Dad, how would you answer that question? What does it mean to be a Jew?
Well, I would totally agree with what Ayla said. It's being part of a culture that's impacted the world in a way that far surpasses our numbers in terms of demography. And a person who's born Jewish may attempt to change their religion, change their identity, but when the rubber hits the road, society won't let you forget who you are. So it's very important to find strength in your Judaism or your Jewish identity. We have a literature, we have a religion, we have a culture that's universal in terms of my feeling connected to Jews in Iran, in Africa, in Asia, all over the world. We share a culture and a certain history that other ethnicities that base their identity on a geographic location, like being Irish or Italian or French or German, have trouble relating to, because our culture for the last 2,000 years hasn't been based on a geographic location or a common bloodline or a certain look racially. It's based on a set of values and a culture and a history that we all share.
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to being ethnic, I hate, I don't know if you could say necessarily race, but yeah, to your point, Ayla, you take a DNA test and it comes up Jewish.
Yeah. And I think race and ethnicity is something that people use pretty interchangeably, but race it's primarily based off of your physical appearance, which is like, but not all Jews look the same, like grandpa used, or Ronnie, there are Jews in Africa and Asia and Brazil. Like we're all a tribe, we all, like all over the world, practicing Jews mourn the destruction of our temple in Israel. We celebrate being released from slavery in Egypt.
Yeah. And to your point, Dad, one of the points of resonance for me every year when we observe Seder on Passover, it occurs to me that this is something that our people are doing all over the world. That when we welcome, when we say Kim Sarab Reb and Eli Novi comes in, he's coming in on cue and he's going to the Jew next door, or the Jew in the next state, or the Jew in the next country. This is something that we are doing as a people together on the same night. So there is a connectedness there culturally as well as ethnically. I take your point about there being a distinction between ethnicity and race. I'm curious if you can remember at what point you had a conscious understanding of your identity as a Jew and what you understood that to be.
Well, I mean, I was born Jewish, as you guys know, and raised in like a very Jewish household. I had a bat mitzvah, which I definitely didn't appreciate at the time. I was just a very anxious child, and I was like, I don't want to do it, whatever. But yeah, no, we went to synagogue, high holidays, and did the fun cultural stuff. But I never really connected with it as like a cultural thing until I kind of came to college and started experiencing things on my own and connecting with these other people. And so I definitely do have a different relationship with Judaism than I did as a kid, just kind of being forced to like go to synagogue.
Yeah.
Okay, can I jump in here and ask Ayla a question?
Yeah, of course.
Unlike your father and me, you were raised in an environment that wasn't primarily Jewish, where you were basically a minority, but not a persecuted minority. Yeah. Being Jewish was like maybe you had one or two kids in your class who was Jewish until you went to Albert Einstein. How is it that when you got to college, your Jewish identity suddenly became important to you?
I was exposed to Hillel, which is this, I think, national organization for Jewish students in college. There's one in San Francisco, which was exciting. So me and my friend Cora, we went to Shabbat one night, and like it was just really, really cool. And I just never felt, my friend Cora, who's not Jewish, she said, I've never felt so welcome at a religious gathering. Like it was just kind of a family, just having dinner and talking about stuff. And they just made it very relatable and practical. So just something we could all just connect with in our daily lives without necessarily having to, do Shema every morning or, unless we want to, or just kind of little tidbits of Judaism and just how you can apply it to your life. And that, it just feels a lot more meaningful to me now.
Yeah. What about you, Dad? It must have been, you grew up, born in 47, grew up in the 50s in Brooklyn. What about you? Can you remember consciously being aware, when you said to your 3-year-old self, I don't know, I'm a Jew, how did that when did it all happen, and what was involved in that?
I had an experience very early in life. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. Growing up in Brooklyn, I was playing with a bunch of kids in somebody's alleyway. And this kid, Roger, said to me, "You Jews killed Jesus Christ."
You're like,
and number one, up until that point, I assumed everybody was Jewish.
Right.
I didn't know there were people who weren't Jewish. Number two, I didn't know who Jesus Christ was. I didn't remember killing him. And I ran home crying to my father, who was in the grocery store around the corner. And I don't remember what my father said to me, but that was my first experience of understanding that I was different and that there were people out there who hated me for something that I didn't quite understand.
Oh, I guess I could jump on this too, like little things when I was little. Like, yeah, people would tell me I'm going to hell. And as a Jewish person, like I don't have a concept. I never had a concept of hell because it's not really like if you do this, you're sinning and you're going to hell. It's just kind of, I don't know. My response is Santa Claus isn't real, but the joke's still kind of on me because I'm not celebrating Christmas. But yeah, little things like that.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, like you're different.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing about that, this is kind of a side note, is that concept of, say the magic words and you're going to this otherworldly place called hell or heaven. That's actually not scriptural. That's, New Testament or Hebrew Bible. That's more Socratic in its understanding of a thing called heaven or a thing called hell. But that's not.
I don't know about that, Corey.
I do know. Whoa.
I read Revelations for the first time in my life about 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And there's some pretty scary stuff in Revelations.
Yes, there is some pretty scary stuff, but it's not an otherworldly place. Jesus's resurrection was specifically bodily. It was the first fruits of the resurrection. And when you look at Revelation 21 and 22, it's not some otherworldly, non-physical place. It's God's creation that that Creator God is redeeming. So this whole, say the magic words and go to heaven, or, don't say them and go to hell. That's not a very scripturally sound prescription. But like I said, that's for another conversation. What I can say about the prior question about understanding a conscious understanding, being conscious of my identity as a Jew, is it was never an identity that I wasn't aware of. In other words, as soon as I was conscious of being a Jew, and all of my childhood memories certainly going into adulthood, even in my 20s when I was certainly more of a drifter, truth seeker, whatever you want to call it, I never shook my identity as a Jew. And ironically, I was never more keenly aware of my Jewish identity than after I became a Christian and started attending these evangelical churches. But in a way, that's why it was so important to me to have bris for each of the boys, and every year to observe, Passover, and, there are certain observances that have become that much more precious to me, even having come to the revelation, if you will, as a Christian. I still identify very much as a Jew. I'd like to take a step back for a second, and Dad, I'd like you to address this, or I'm sure Ayla, I'm sure you've studied quite a bit of this too, but can we talk a bit about historical anti-Semitism? I don't know if a lot of folks that haven't really studied history, or maybe aren't Jews themselves, really have an appreciation for how long this has been going on and what it looks like from century to century.
The best source that I can recommend is a book. I don't remember the name of the author, but it's called Constantine's Sword. From the destruction of the temple and the diaspora that was still in, or at least that lasted until the state of Israel was founded, Jews were looked upon as a threat to the Roman Empire. And the reason for that is because pagan religions all made their rulers into gods, and Jews refuse to accept that. We believe in the unity of God. And once Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, anti-Semitism got baked into the European consciousness. As early as the First Council of Nicaea in, I think, 325 or something like that. And over the centuries, as a persecuted minority, couldn't own property, couldn't enter professions. We were often stigmatized and accused of doing things like poisoning wells, using Christian babies' blood to bake on matzah. During the bubonic plague, that was a terrible time for Jews because many communities were held responsible for the bubonic plague, kind of like we see the anti-Asian phenomenon here in the United States, since Trump announced it was the Chinese disease or something like that. And and it's a very, very peculiar bigotry because on the one hand, we're accused of being communists. On the other hand, we're accused of being the super capitalists who controls all the money of the world, both of which is absolutely ridiculous. And it's just an indication of how institutionalized and systemic anti-Semitism is in the European culture and in the American culture as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it seems like it's been going on pretty much since the beginning of history. And it's just a matter of how is the heat turned up or is it turned down just a bit? Is it a low simmer, but it's always present. There's always something there.
I mean, there's anti-Semitic literature in Japan, and Japan has almost no Jews.
Well, it's better to have a long history of oppression than a short history. That's what I'll say.
You need to explain that.
Oh, I think I understand.
Like a long history of oppression than like short history.
Yeah. In other words, the Persians tried to get us and we're still here. The Babylonians tried to get us. The Romans
tried to get us.
The Romans. Yeah.
Why are we still talking about them?
Yeah, we're still here. And they're, they're just making movies about those guys. What about
we're making movies about those guys?
What about our own? I was curious, actually, Ayla. We just about a month ago, our family had a Zoom reunion. It was the 100-year anniversary of when our family landed on Ellis Island. I was curious if you learned anything new from that. I'm sure you grew up, like me and your dad, listening to the stories from our family. But I'm wondering if you learned anything new from the reunion.
Well, it's just really interesting to just physically see all these people that I'm connected to. And Grandpa gave me his little manuscript of our family history. And I did a project on it a while ago. And I read it a couple of times and it's just really interesting. But just, actually seeing all these people and the PowerPoint and everyone just talking about their own little stories and how we're just this little piece of our whole generation in 100 years. How crazy. And just again, going back to the idea that we're this tribe and no matter where we are, we're still Jewish. We're everywhere.
Yeah, still Jewish. So when I was a little bit younger than you, in New Jersey, you get your license at 17. So when I turned 17, I started driving into Brooklyn and spending a considerable amount of time with Baba and Zayda. And Shay. So you're named after Zayda's Saul. In fact, are you Shalamed Rachel or Shalamed
Esther?
Esther. Okay. After your mom's grandmother or something?
No. Renee was really Esther.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense. Anyway, so I used to drive into Brooklyn and I would spend hours and hours just sitting in this little kitchen. They had a little tiny kitchen and just usually it would be Zayda, Saul would talk for hours and hours. But then when Zayda passed away, Baba talked a lot more. But she would often come in and she would either correct Zayda's telling of the story or, sometimes she would tell the story. But I would always say, come in and say, tell me a story. Tell me about when you grew up or have something specific I was curious about. And it was as if it happened yesterday. They could share about it. And even though my grandfather grew up here in the States, he grew up in Brooklyn. He had spent time around Baba's family and he knew those stories as if they were his own. And then, of course, Baba shared, and I got to know her sister, Aunt Rosie. I got to know my Uncle Saul, her uncle, her father's brother, and heard those stories. Those stories are our own, and some of them are horrendous. We've shared a couple of these stories on other episodes, about one. It was probably not too long before they left for America, but it was Easter, and Cossacks came through their town, and Rosie and Baba hid in a haystack for, it was a day, Dad, or a couple days?
No, for a whole day.
Yeah. And Baba, my grandmother said that when she came out, she saw her neighbor friend that was about their age, her and Rosie's age, came out with the heads of her parents in her hands. Her parents had been beheaded. There were houses that were burned down. This was something very, that they lived through. And again, I only half jokingly said the one thing everybody could agree upon is everybody hated the Jews. But it was very real. It came with real consequences. So this is something that hits close to home.
Ayla, have you experienced anti-Semitism in your life?
Well, I mean, I know we'll talk about at my school a little later, but just growing up, like there's these little subtle things, like I said before, like, you're going to hell. I remember in first grade, we were doing these like Christmas crafts, and I had to paint a blue flower pot and everyone else could paint a red one. And I was kind of like, okay. And then it's just always weird with like taking, have to take off 2 days of school because Jewish holidays are never off. And then, explaining to the teachers and the teachers being weird about it. And it was just always like a just odd feeling of like, I don't really belong until, the high school, which I went to for a couple years, a lot of Jewish students. And then I was like, whoa, it's not just me. But it's interesting how now kind of reconnecting with my Jewish identity. And I guess it is related to me experiencing more anti-Semitism now. And now I've just become more passionate about it. We're like, all right, well, screw you. I'm Jewish. So, you can hate me all you want. And not really. So I've really never felt as uncomfortable being outwardly Jewish at on this campus in this city, which is just really sad.
Yeah.
And it's strange and ironic because San Francisco
is so diverse and so inclusive.
And so liberal.
Yeah.
To hear that San Francisco now is a hotbed of anti-Semitism is very troubling.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of anti-Semitic experiences, incidents, the way it expresses itself that you could share with us, either on your campus or in the city of San Francisco generally?
Well, the general attitude is like, you need to denounce Israel or you're not a good Jew. That's kind of there's no in between. It's just it's hard because San Francisco is so like just there's so much activism and diversity and social justice, but they're really like perpetuating this idea of dual loyalty where conflating the Jewish people's homeland being important to them. And we literally pray to Israel, and conflating that with being politically active Zionists and hating Palestinians.
It makes sense. There's a lack of discernment there. There's a lack. You're confusing our identity as Jews with someone, as well as it's coming also from a place of not understanding what the conflict is.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if you're on those emails that Sheila sends, but Sheila sent a note the morning after they had to go into their bunker, their their shelter, 3 times in the middle of the night when Hamas was literally bombing their home.
Sheila is a cousin who lives in Israel.
I think they're reducing this entire deep and complex history of a piece of land that is so important to so many people to, like, it's not a conflict, it's an occupation. And if you can't see that, you're a racist bigot.
So I wanted to read something, to a couple paragraphs from Michael Gerson's essay. It was in the Washington Post on the 14th of this, just a couple days ago. Because it provides, it doesn't address anti-Semitism specifically, but I think it provides a little bit of context for, how folks, well, I'll just read it, and it sheds some light on this dynamic, this tension. He says, for most people, wokeness involves being mindful of the cruel and oppressive portions of American history, being alert to persistent structural racism, and being determined to right past and present wrongs. This is the theory that attracted many people to street protests last summer. By this standard, count me as woke. But there is an academic version of critical race theory that goes a great deal further. In this variety of postmodernism, all power structures are rotted to the core by white supremacy, the ideals of democracy, pluralism, freedom, the rule of law, even reasoned debate itself are myths or narratives serving the privileged. In this view, politics is no longer a contest of ideas, it is a fight for power, a zero-sum struggle between oppressor and oppressed. This type of wokeness involves seeing through the pretensions of a free society and favoring the oppressed in every instance. The distinctions here are not minor. There is a difference between using critical race theory as a tool to understand unjust power structures and believing that every outworking of Western democratic theory is inherently unjust. There is a difference between examining the disturbing truths of American history and denying the existence of objective truth and the possibility of persuasion. So I was thinking about something that you had written when we were texting and emailing about this before. I was thinking that projecting onto, Israel obviously fired back when Hamas bombed residential neighborhoods. Israel obviously fired back in great force. So there's this projection of Israel, and anyone who is sympathetic with Israel, whether it be by identity or in principle, you are part of this racist, supremacist sort of ideology, this Western white, to your point, I think you used the word conflation before. There's a lack of discernment. There's a lack of nuance that's really required to understand. Like, by the way, there was a guy that was a prime minister there for at least the last dozen or so years, up until a few days ago, that I really disagreed with pretty much 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if that's what you were alluding to, but
yeah, no. And I mean, that kind of goes to anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism, because they are different, but there is a line, and it gets kind of blurry. You can be an activist, and I'll stand by the Palestinian people any day. No, I don't want oppression. Like, you can be anti-Zionist and not support Israel, but villainizing an entire group of people, an entire country, instead of making a genuine criticism about a government, as you would with any other country. You're holding it to this double standard. It's harmful to the Jewish people.
So let me ask you this question, Ayla. Do you consider yourself a Zionist?
I support. I like. It's hard because I think I do, but in San Francisco, Zionist, that's like a bad word. That's like code for I'm a racist bigot. So it's like I can support, my people's right to the land too. But that's why I kind of hesitate to call myself a Zionist, even though the kind of original meaning I can 100% stand by, which is the Jewish people's right to govern themselves. But it's
Do you support the concept of a Jewish homeland?
Yes, absolutely.
A Jewish state in Israel where every Jew is guaranteed the right of citizenship.
Absolutely. And I know that's what Zionism is, but it's like it's a traumatic word because it's just a bad, like, it's almost a slur here. It's just so weird.
Yeah.
I think that the bigots of the world on the right and the left are very successful at identifying a label and demonizing it. So, for example, when I first came of age politically in high school and started to think about these issues in a serious way, being a liberal was a positive thing. Being liberal was a very positive thing, and liberal values were traditional American values. And somehow the term liberal has morphed where today it's used as a pejorative.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true of Zionism. I'm a Zionist. I'm a proud, loud Zionist. And I think Zionism is a good thing. And I'm not going to let the rest of the world turn that into an ugly term, because it's not racist. It's not oppressive. It simply is the fact that without a homeland, Jews are vulnerable every place in the world. That's what the Holocaust proved to me and to Jews generally. And Israel is our homeland. And when the Palestinians leadership comes to the recognition that we have a right to be there too, and they're not dedicated to throwing us into the Mediterranean, that's when we can make peace with them.
Dad, I'm reminded of a MASH episode where Hawkeye was defending a Korean woman who was being held as prisoner. She had wounds that he was treating as a doctor, but she at the same time was being held as a prisoner by an American soldier, American MP that was coming across in, all the ways you would expect for a guy that Hawkeye didn't like to come across, right? And while you appreciate, through most of the episode, you appreciated Hawkeye's instincts to defend someone who was a prisoner, defend someone who, was being oppressed in a visible way. It turned out that she actually was a terrorist. We found out by the end of the episode that she was a terrorist. And it reminds me oftentimes of the mistake that we make. While I can understand and sympathize with someone who sees only one side of the equation and says the Palestinian people, the children, and but we do have to take into account that Hamas is a terrorist organization, that they bombed our families' homes,
Yeah.
So a similar situation arose at San Francisco State. You brought it to my attention, Ayla. I really appreciate it. Last September of 2020, a woman, I don't know if I'm getting the pronunciation correct, but Layla Khaled, is that how you say it? Layla Khaled.
Yeah, something like that.
She was scheduled to speak at a conference at San Francisco State University, hosted by two professors. I couldn't believe it when I did some research on who she is. So she wasn't just a one-time terrorist. She's not
just like a hard-hitting, tell it like it is activist. Like, no, she hijacked planes with innocent civilians.
Multiple, not just one plane. Not just one.
And it's not like she wasn't convicted or there was some gray area. She was traded back to the 4 innocent civilians. This is a very black and white issue.
Yeah.
There are other people that can advocate for Palestine,
right,
who I would support advocating for Palestine. I can't support somebody that I know wants to kill my people. That's right. As simple as that. And that makes me feel unsafe.
Yeah. No, and she still identifies as part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, which is a terrorist organization. The planes, one was TWA flight headed to Tel Aviv. Another was an LL flight headed out of Amsterdam, headed to New York. So it wasn't just like, oh, I happened to be on the plane and, said some supportive things. She was actively trying to kill hundreds of people. So I was happy to see that there were the Jewish Coalition Group End Jewish Hatred on campus prevented the conference from using but it was like a limited victory. It was only from using the video conferencing software and platforms.
I think she streamed on YouTube for a bit for a few minutes until she said something. And then it was like, so she said something about like by any means necessary. And then I think they cut off the stream.
Okay.
But in response, Hillel, we had a vigil for victims of terror, which was very moving, and just hearing everybody's stories of their grandparents and their, this and that. I mean, there's a lot of Jewish victims of terror. We also had a guest speaker, the pilot of one of the planes that she hijacked.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was telling his story about it, and I believe she wrote a memoir about her experience. And he said, I read it, and she was saying something about she was tackled by 15 people and there was excessive force. And he's saying, yeah, I was the pilot on the plane. There were 2 air marshals. And yeah, they tackled the heck out of her because she was trying to hijack the plane, man.
Yeah. And she took the pin out of one of the grenades and rolled it down into it's a miracle that it didn't go off. So what was the climate like? Was there pushback against the Jewish organization when you tried to stop her from speaking?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was, how can you call yourself a progressive if you must not support this if you support this? We're just saying this kind of language is very harmful to us, and it's not okay. And the response is, well, you hate the Palestinians and you want them to and it's just clear that they're just not listening to us. They don't want to listen to us. We're telling them that's not what we want. And we're saying these specific things like, hey, we just want peace, man. We just want to be Jewish and not feel like we're going to be attacked or murdered or hated because of who we are. But that translates to, I'm hateful.
So Ayla, something that I wonder about generally on the San Francisco State campus, do you think this anti-Zionist / anti-Semitism, is that the predominant culture, or is it just that those who express it are the loudest?
I don't know, because I think it is just the culture of the campus, because I have emailed the university president a couple of times with some passionate words. And, the response is, it's a priority for us. It is, it's a priority for us. But, nothing really happens. So there is anti-Semitism on campus, and the school is not taking an active stance against that, or saying hey, don't ask all Jews on campus to answer for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so to me, that just kind of says, well, that's just the culture of the school. If you're standing against Asian hate, if you're standing against, this kind of hate, this kind of hate, this kind of hate, you're not speaking up for me. You don't care about me. Yeah. I've gotten, numbers of emails and different initiatives for other, minority groups to be active and love and not hate, that sort of thing. And I support that. And it just hurts that we're not included in that one.
Right. Why do you think that is? And I'm curious to your answer too, Dad. But first, Ayla, why do you think that is? Is it unique to Jewish people that? A lot of people don't see anti-Semitism as a real problem, because it's kind of taught that it started and ended with the Holocaust, and that's anti-Semitism. And so I think we're just often excluded from issues and conversations surrounding white supremacy because
people don't see it as a real problem, even though historically we have been persecuted for being an inferior race. So, and when we are included, it's more as an afterthought. And I think it's difficult because when you're talking about racism and anti-Semitism, the conversation just immediately becomes comparative and undermining when our oppressors, for I guess lack of a better word, share that same ideology towards us. And so in America, it shouldn't, I mean, anti-Semitism should not be the sole focus of these conversations, but just to exclude it entirely, or like I said, include it as an afterthought, just feels weird, because while a lot of Jewish people in America do not outwardly present as Jewish and don't face the same discrimination of people of color, that's a fact. But just to erase these thousands of years of history where we were not considered equals is just like insulting and just wrong.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I think we're a victim of our own success. In spite of persecution, Jews have always found a way as a group to not only be successful, but to have a huge impact on the larger culture, much greater than our numbers demographically. I mean, we represent less than 1% of the American population.
Yeah, it's like 0.2% or something like that.
It's something like, less than 1%. And yet we're represented in huge numbers in all of the professions and the sciences and, in academia. So I think that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a large extent, Asian Americans share that up until recently, when elderly Asian women were being beaten up just for being Asian.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. I think the second part of it is that Americans don't have a clue that open anti-Semitism was the norm in American society until the Holocaust, till the 1950s. Father Coughlin, a guy whose sole pitch was hate the Jews, had the most popular radio program right through the 1930s.
Yeah. Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, they were very prominent figures in the public, public sphere that were very vocal anti-Semites. I mean, it was when you study some of the recent history, as recent as pre-World War II, it's daunting to think about. But Ayla, you had a really good point. I don't know how long ago this was, within the last decade or so, that it occurred to me that there was this sentiment out there where being smart and well-read and accomplished all of a sudden became a bad thing. But you made a different association. Can you tease that out a little bit?
Yeah, the elites. It's little things that I'm learning about. I mean, because these like conspiracies of like the lizard people running the country, like the elites that control the media and the economy, that's just a code word for Jew. It just is.
Yeah.
Or like a dog whistle, I guess would be called.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so subtle at times. Dad, I meant to ask you earlier, I'm sure that you experienced overt racism. I had a couple of, not racism, I should say, specifically anti-Semitism. And I had a couple of what I might refer to as soft anti-Semitism and a couple more overt. But I'm curious about your own experience.
I've experienced the typical American kid kind of anti-Semitism on and off all my life. It's just something you accept, and it's something you learn to deal with one way or another. About 2.5 years ago, I put on a yarmulke, and I wear a yarmulke all the time. And what's interesting to me is that in the 2.5 years that I walk around openly expressing myself as a Jew, I've only had 2 negative experiences. They were very negative experiences and very troubling experiences. But 98% of the time, wearing the yarmulke has been a very positive experience where people approach me and little kids want to know what that yarmulke means. And the parents tell them, oh, it means he's Jewish and the amazing thing is that in America, most people are very tolerant of Jews. But the anti-Semites are so loud and so determined in their anti-Semitism that it's very troubling. I had an experience about 1.5 years ago in Manhattan. Grandma and I came out of a show, and a young black man yelled, "Hey, you Jew, buy my CD. I know you're rich because you're Jewish." So I turned around and he was like right in my face. And he was, like a late teen, early 20 something. I'm 74 at the time, maybe 72. So it was a very threatening kind of experience. And I'm in this crowd of people coming out of all the theaters on Broadway, and nobody said a word.
Oh.
And a crowd started to form. And grandma was like terrified. And she just was pulling me away. But I couldn't allow myself to be pulled away. So I said to this kid, I said, let me give you a word of advice. You need a different sales pitch.
Yeah, that's more disarming than a lot of other comebacks you could have come up with
and I kind of like threw the CD back at him and walked away. And again, nobody in the crowd did anything as this guy kept yelling after me, "Hey, you Jew, hey, you Jew." And wow, I mean, that was pretty scary, and it was pretty disturbing. And yet, I'll go to a supermarket in Santa Clarita, California, and all of the people in the store, the workers, are like my friends because I'm the only guy who goes shopping in that store who wears a yarmulke. And so they know me.
Yeah.
So I mean that's very uplifting, and it gives me a good warm feeling. And they say, "Hey Ronnie, how you doing? What's going on in Brooklyn? When you going home?" It's there's a Jewish holiday coming up. We have challah in the bakery, stuff like that. It's really
that's nice.
Yeah, it is nice.
Well, when I became a Christian, it might I don't know if it'll be surprising to hear that I experienced different versions of anti-Semitism. Most of it was soft, what I would consider or categorize as soft anti-Semitism, meaning there wasn't anything malicious behind it. It was more an expression of ignorance. For example, folks at my church would ask me, "I don't get why all you Jews, blah, blah, blah," like whatever it might be.
I had a funny experience at Grace Baptist, by the way.
With what? Do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. So you belong to this mega, very conservative Baptist evangelical church called Grace Baptist in Santa Clarita.
Which it should be said, most of the people are lovely people.
They're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people.
However,
I have never met so many people who fell over themselves to share with me that they had Jewish ancestors.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
The only thing I can compare it to is that everybody from Texas thinks their grandparent was Cherokee or something.
Yeah.
I mean, but I had this one experience where I was picking Jack, Ayla's cousin, Corey's son, up from the Passion Play rehearsal.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just there, and a woman turns around. She was in this clutch of other women. And she turned and she says, "You're Corey's dad, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "So are you a completed Jew?" I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "Are you a completed Jew?" And it suddenly dawned on me what she meant, that Corey was completed, but I wasn't. So I looked at my arms and legs. I said, "Well, I feel very complete. I'm not a Christian, but I feel very complete. And she kind of like, her jaw dropped and total silence.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a really strange experience.
Yeah. So there were some, still softer experiences like that. There were some that were a little bit more offensive, like when they,
that was pretty offensive, actually.
Yeah, that was pretty offensive. But also there are times when they would, like when they held a Seder at the church. It was more of a colonialist impulse than a truly evangelical impulse, because it was communicating, this is what the Seder really means. This is what the Seder should really, and we know because we're completed, we're Christians, and I found that to be really offensive. They were co-opting something as if they had the answer and Jews really didn't. So that was a little bit
even
more
than that. You and I attended a series of classes.
Yeah, I couldn't do that again. I couldn't sit through that again.
About a guy who was born Jewish and had converted at a very young age, was giving a seminar about Judaism and Jews, and he got some really basic stuff wrong.
Really wrong. Yeah, really
wrong.
Yeah.
And so I offered to do a little class of my own.
No, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen.
And the response was, well, first we have to take it up with the deacons.
Right.
And then we have to take it up with whatever other body supervise. And the answer came down and said, no, we won't let you do anything educational in this particular church.
Yeah.
In other words, they wanted to learn Judaism from somebody who wasn't a Jew. Right. Because their goal was to convert other Jews. Their goal wasn't to understand Judaism.
Yeah. So there were instances like that. The one that really hit me the hardest was the last couple of years. You referred to the Passion Play. The depiction of certain characters was worse than a caricature. I mean, the depiction, and that was the other thing too, is that in the last play that I was Passion Play that I was familiar with, they conflated the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they just conflated all of these characters into the proxy for all the antagonist character, and put the makeup on to make them look even more evil. And it was like somebody's got to be aware of how overtly anti-Semitic this is.
Well, look at Mother Gothel and Rapunzel. I mean, like the blood libel at its core.
Yeah. So
can you expand on that, Ayla, for the listeners who don't know what you're talking about?
Okay, well, correct me, Grandpa, if I'm explaining it a little wrong, but there's this age-old anti-Semitic kind of conspiracy called blood libel, that Jews were, and one of you said something like baking Christian babies into matzah. It's like a lot of things, like Jewish people drinking Christian babies' blood for youth, and this kind of thing. And you can see it too, like throughout, even with the focused on like anti-Zionism, there's a real emphasis on they're murdering babies. And it feels like that's something that's very present, and it's just like always an underlying thing, like Jews and babies. I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah. Dad, do you make any connections between that and the prominent QAnon theory?
Oh, there's a lot there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to make a point before that a lot of times anti-Semitism isn't overtly anti-Semitic, but it's couched in these conflations between a hatred for the way we think in a unique way. We think in a Talmudic way. We always think on the one hand and on the other hand, and this rabbi and that rabbi and this, like there's all these different opinions. So we're trained up in a way of thinking, in a way of being that, I mean, if you can't think in terms of nuance, that's just who we are, just being people.
I mean, I feel like we're one of the most self-critical people. Like, we argue with each other. We argue with God.
We argue with ourselves.
With ourselves. It's not like we're not willing, we're stuck in our ways and we're not willing willing to listen, and I
Yeah.
think and like, for example, like even if you're just using the Holocaust as your only example of anti-Semitism, it didn't start with ghettos and trains and gas chambers. It started with like these little instances and these, kind of ideas that get stuck in your head, like these are just Jewish people. They become normalized, and then it's easier to excuse like more non-subtle things. And then, so it's like, it's not that when we're calling it out, it's not that we're sensitive and we hate other people and we want to be part of the oppression club. These are literally the building blocks for our genocide. Yeah. So it's hard, when people say we're overreacting, like we're just trying to make this not happen again. Like, do you not see?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the most disturbing developments in current American political culture was the Charlottesville experience, where people came together, presumably to protest statues of Southern Civil War heroes being taken down, and somehow ended up in a torchlight parade with people screaming, "Jews will not replace us."
Yeah.
How does that happen? How does that happen that a demonstration dedicated to one thing morphs into something that looked like a Nazi rally from 1938 in America? And then our president says there are good people on both sides. How does that happen?
Yeah, there's a permission structure that's created and an encouragement that picks up steam. Yeah, there's a lot of elements there that it's going to take many years to diagnose and to understand how we got here,
So before we end the podcast, I have one more question for Ayla. For my first grandchild.
I know what you're going to ask.
What am I going to ask?
Are you going to go on birthright soon?
Oh, no, I wasn't going to ask that. But that's a good question. Are you going to go on birthright soon?
Soon. Who knows? Soon.
Who knows? So,
well, definitely before I can't, but we'll see how things, turn out for me in the next few years.
You have to, your life has to be at the right time for you to do it. I get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I know when you left for college, the idea of marrying a Jew had absolutely no priority for you. Dating Jews, marrying Jews. I'm wondering if your experience at college with anti-Semitism and being more connected to your Jewish identity, if that will translate into something that'll become important to you for the rest of your life.
Well, I would say that I don't care if my partner is Jewish, not Jewish. As long as he's voting blue, the kids are going to be Jewish anyway. So if they don't want the kids Jewish, sorry, buddy. You don't have to be Jewish, but they're getting bat mitzvahs or bar mitzvahs, and I'm sorry, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's
There's
good.
my answer. Yeah. You're welcome, Grandpa, for bringing you Jewish great grandchildren. As soon as I can find an NJB, nice Jewish boy, bring some chutzpah into my life.
Yeah, he should be a doctor. Okay, well. I certainly learned a great deal. I'm really appreciative, seriously, because it does, you kind of put yourself out there. And I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. And I appreciate your perspective. So I just, and it's fun. It's just fun to hang out with you. So.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And it's okay, fine. It's good to see you too, Dad.
It's good to see you too. It's good to see you too.
So anyway, as always, if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, leave us a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts. and give us a shout on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other.
Love you, Ayla.
Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciate what you've heard here, please go to iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. That really helps move us up the chart so others can find out what we're up to here. For Ronnie Nathan, I'm Corey Nathan, and we've been talking politics and religion without killing each other. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.